I always thought the unraveling of a marriage would come in loud, dramatic bursts, screaming matches, thrown glasses, maybe even slammed doors echoing down the street. Instead, mine began with a whisper. A casual explanation offered one Tuesday night while she slipped her shoes off in the hallway. "Late again," I said, glancing at the clock that was inching toward 10:30. "Yeah," she replied lightly. "My cousin needed more help with her wedding plans. I couldn't leave her hanging." At the time, I didn't press. People get busy. Weddings are hectic. But something in the way her voice trailed off, how she avoided my eyes, snagged at me. She had always been animated when she spoke, especially about family. But now, the words hung limp, as if rehearsed. Her cousin, Melanie, lived across town. We'd attended her engagement party together months earlier. Nice girl, bright laugh, not the type to hide things. I didn't think much more of it that evening. I kissed my wife goodnight, told myself not to be paranoid, and tried to sleep. But when her wedding planning nights multiplied, the knot in my gut tightened. 2 nights a week turned into 3, then 4. By the second month, I was tucking our daughter into bed alone more often than not, brushing her hair from her face and making up silly bedtime stories to cover the empty space where her mother should have been. I told myself this was a temporary rush before the wedding. Once Melanie said, "I do," things would go back to normal. But then one Sunday, while my wife napped on the couch, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen. A text from Melanie herself. "Hope we can catch up soon. Haven't seen you in forever." Forever. The word hit like a fist to the chest. If Melanie hadn't seen my wife in ages, then what exactly was she doing all those nights? I didn't confront her immediately. I've always been the type to gather evidence before drawing conclusions. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the cousin was being playful. Maybe. The maybes kept me awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. The next day, I decided to test the waters. I called Melanie under the guise of asking about her fiancé's new job. We made small talk, nothing unusual. Then I slipped in. Must be exciting, having my wife helping with all the wedding details. There was a pause, a confused laugh. "Oh, I didn't know she was interested. That's sweet of her, but no, we've hired a planner. I wouldn't dare rope her into this circus." Her words froze me. Every hair on my arm stood on end. I mumbled something to end the call and sat at my desk, staring at nothing. The truth was too sharp to ignore now. My wife wasn't helping with her cousin's wedding. She wasn't at Melanie's at all. So where was she? That question burrowed into my mind and refused to leave. Every late return, every excuse, every distracted glance across the dinner table became evidence stacked against her. I noticed things I had brushed aside before. The faint perfume that wasn't hers lingering on her clothes. The careful way she charged her phone in the kitchen instead of leaving it by the bed. The sudden laughter she muffled when texting in the bathroom. I began moving differently around her, pretending to believe her stories, nodding at her explanations, all while a darker current pulled at me beneath the surface. I told myself I needed proof. Without it, I was just a jealous husband inventing ghosts. That week, I installed a simple GPS tracker on her car, ordered under the pretense of monitoring fuel efficiency. She never questioned it. Technology was always my domain. I also retrieved one of those small pocket recorders I used for meetings, tucking it under the passenger seat. My heart hammered as I crouched in the garage that night, her laughter from the kitchen filtering faintly through the walls. It felt wrong, underhanded. But betrayal, if that's what this was, demanded exposure. 2 nights later, she left again. Same excuse. "Melanie's overwhelmed with the florist, I'll be late." I kissed her cheek, watched her drive away, and sat in silence until our daughter fell asleep. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the tracker. Her car wasn't across town. It wasn't anywhere near Melanie's neighborhood. Instead, the little blinking dot sat at a boutique hotel near the interstate. The name alone was enough to twist my stomach. It wasn't the kind of place for business conferences or girls' nights. It was the kind of place couples slipped into when they wanted to disappear. I waited until midnight before checking again. She was still there. When she finally returned at nearly 2 in the morning, she tiptoed into the bedroom, the faint click of her heels betraying her attempt at silence. I kept my breathing steady, feigning sleep while my chest burned. I could smell cologne on her clothes, sharper than anything I owned. The next morning, I retrieved the recorder. Hands trembling, I plugged it into my computer. The audio was muffled at first, car doors, engine noise, indistinct chatter. Then laughter, not hers. A man's voice. His words weren't clear, but the tone was unmistakable, intimate, teasing, too close. I closed the laptop before hearing more. My stomach lurched violently, while clawing at my throat. Proof. I had proof now. And yet, with that proof came a question I hadn't prepared for. What would I do with it? I couldn't tell our daughter, not yet. She was only 8, still living in the world where both parents were infallible. And I couldn't storm into the kitchen waving the recorder. Not without knowing who this man was, how long this had been going on, and what else she'd lied about. I needed more. So I set the stage. I made sure to appear calm, even affectionate. I offered to take over more chores, encouraged her nights, with Melanie, pretended not to notice her distracted gaze. All while I built my private case in silence. I checked the tracker each time she left, watched the dot hover at the same hotel again and again. Sometimes 2 hours, sometimes the entire night. Each visit carved another wound, another scar. One Friday evening, curiosity gnawed too deeply. I drove to the hotel myself, parking 2 blocks away. The lobby glowed warm against the night, people coming and going in pairs. I stayed in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles blanched, waiting. And then, through the glass doors, I saw her. She wasn't alone. A tall man with broad shoulders walked beside her, their hands brushing together as if testing the limits of public boldness. She laughed at something he said, tilting her head in that familiar way I had once thought was only mine to see. My heart clenched so violently it felt like a heart attack. I wanted to burst from the car, to demand answers, to drag her out by the wrist. But I stayed frozen, every nerve locked in place. Because suddenly, I realized this was bigger than her lies. This was a performance. She had crafted an entire fiction, the fake wedding planner, the cousin in need, the endless errands, to mask a parallel life I hadn't known existed. And if she could lie so seamlessly about this, what else had she fabricated? When they disappeared into the elevator, I finally exhaled, the night air biting at my lungs. My reflection in the rearview mirror startled me. Pale, hollow-eyed, a man I hardly recognized. I drove home in silence, headlights carving tunnels through the darkness. Every mile deepened the dread settling in my bones. Because now I knew. She wasn't just sneaking around. She was living another life. And I was about to uncover just how deep the deception went. The morning after I followed her to the hotel, the world felt strangely muted. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock in the kitchen, even the sound of my daughter's laughter as she watched cartoons, it all seemed distant, like I was hearing it through a layer of thick glass. I sat at the table pretending to read the newspaper, though the words blurred into nonsense. My wife moved around the kitchen as if nothing had changed, her hair tied up, humming softly. She poured coffee, kissed my cheek, and said she'd be out late again for wedding stuff. Her casual ease made my stomach twist. She was skilled, I had to admit. A performance so smooth it could win awards. If I hadn't seen her with my own eyes the night before, if I hadn't watched her slip into an elevator with another man, I might still have believed her. But I couldn't unsee it. That day at work, I did nothing but replay the image of them together. The way she tilted her head toward him, the way his hand brushed her back as though it belonged there. Who was he? A coworker? Someone she met online? My mind raced through possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. I decided I needed to know more than just the where. I needed the who. The GPS tracker had served me well, but it only told me locations. The recorder gave hints, muffled laughter, stray words. But now I required clarity. So I upgraded. That afternoon, I ordered a discreet camera disguised as a key fob. Something I could leave in her car, angled just enough to capture her passengers, her phone calls, her face when she thought she was alone. 2 days later, it arrived. I slipped it onto her keyring without a second thought. She never noticed. She had always been careless with small details, the kind of person who left sunglasses behind at restaurants. I knew she wouldn't look twice at a new keychain. The first time I reviewed the footage, I nearly dropped the device from my hands. It was grainy, yes, but unmistakable. She wasn't alone in the car. The man sat in the passenger seat, his profile sharp against the window. Dark hair, square jaw. A stranger to me. But what froze my blood was the way she looked at him. That tender, unguarded smile. The kind she used to save for me. I watched them kiss at a red light. Quick but certain, the kind of kiss practiced through repetition. Not a fling. Something more. I paused the video, stared at the man's face, and felt something shift inside me. Anger, yes, but also a cold determination. If she thought she could build a second life while weaving me into lies about cousins and florists, she was about to learn how wrong she was. Still, I couldn't act impulsively. I had to play the long game. That week, she came home later than usual. She claimed Melanie had chosen new linens, and they'd been arguing colors. I nodded, smiled faintly, even asked a question or two to keep the facade alive. She answered with such confidence that, if I hadn't known, I might have admired her poise. But once she went upstairs to shower, I opened her laptop. She was meticulous about clearing her history, but she'd forgotten one detail: her email autofill. A half-written message appeared when I typed the letter J. I can't stop thinking about last night. The way you held me. I didn't finish reading. I slammed the laptop shut, hands trembling. J. Whoever he was, his name started with J. For the next 3 nights, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, my body rigid while she breathed softly next to me. I wondered how many lies she had whispered into my ear with the same mouth she used for him. How many times she had looked me in the eye and told me she loved me while planning her next meeting at that hotel. By Thursday, my restlessness turned into resolve. I took the day off under the pretense of illness and drove to the boutique hotel. I parked far enough away to avoid recognition and waited. Hours crawled past, each minute pulling me deeper into obsession. Finally, in the late afternoon, her car appeared. She stepped out wearing the same navy dress she'd worn on our anniversary. The irony stung. A few minutes later, he appeared. Jay, tall, confident, carrying himself like he belonged anywhere he walked. They didn't hold hands, but the proximity was telling. He guided her inside with a casual touch at her elbow. I stayed long enough to see them disappear into the lobby. Then I drove away, my heart hammering, my vision tunneled by fury. That night, she returned around 1 a.m. I was awake, but I feigned sleep. She slipped under the covers, her skin warm from a shower, smelling faintly of soap. She sighed contentedly, as though she had simply been helping her cousin choose between orchids and roses. The audacity of it nearly drove me to scream. But I held back. Not yet. The following weekend, Melanie hosted a small family brunch. We attended together, and I watched closely. When my wife greeted Melanie, they embraced warmly, but Melanie's easy chatter proved she had no idea about the invented late nights. Not a clue. If she had been used as cover, she wasn't aware. That was when the true weight of my wife's deception sank in. She wasn't just lying to me. She was constructing an elaborate stage play, using her cousin as a prop. And everyone, myself included, was just an audience. Later that night, as my wife sat in the living room scrolling her phone, I excused myself to the study. I opened my laptop and pulled up all the data I'd collected: tracker logs, audio files, video snippets. A private archive of betrayal. My hands hovered over the keyboard, tempted to send it all to her family, her friends, anyone who believed in her mask. But I stopped. Timing was everything. If I struck too soon, she could spin the story, claim I was paranoid, controlling, even manipulative. No. If I wanted justice, if I wanted her facade to collapse in one devastating blow, I needed to wait until her lies reached their peak. And then I would shatter them publicly. I began planning. I researched the hotel's event schedule, looking for opportunities. I checked her cousin's wedding date, noting it was only 3 weeks away. That would be the perfect moment. She would expect her cover to be airtight, her excuse ironclad. But I would be ready. In the meantime, I kept playing the role of the supportive husband. I asked about Melanie's progress, nodded at her stories about florists, DJs, and invitation lists. She spun entire narratives about conversations that never happened, details so intricate I almost admired her creativity. Almost. One evening, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced down. A message lit the screen. Same time tomorrow? Can't stop thinking about you. Jay? My chest tightened. Proof in black and white. I deleted nothing, moved nothing, left it exactly as it was. She'd never suspect I saw it. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. My face looked foreign, drawn, older, eyes ringed with shadows. This was the man she had created, not the trusting husband, not the partner she once vowed to cherish, but a hollowed-out investigator digging through scraps of truth. I whispered to myself, just a little longer. Then the curtain falls. Because when it did, it wouldn't be quiet. It would be catastrophic. In the weeks that followed, I lived two lives. To her, I remained the same husband she had always known, steady, supportive, predictable. To myself, I became something colder, more calculating. Every smile I gave her was rehearsed, every question I asked a test, every quiet nod a way to measure how far she would go with her lies. And she went far. The stories grew more elaborate. One night she returned home, cheeks flushed, eyes sparkling, and launched into a long explanation about how Melanie couldn't decide between two photographers. She even described the portfolios in detail, one moody and artistic, the other bright and traditional. She laughed about how indecisive her cousin was. I listened, sipping my tea, fighting to keep my face still. Melanie, of course, had no idea any of this was being said in her name. The sheer audacity of my wife's imagination was staggering. I should have confronted her right then. I should have shouted, slammed my fist on the table, and demanded the truth. But no, I wanted more than confrontation. I wanted exposure. So I set traps. Small ones, at first. When she mentioned the artistic photographer, I later brought it up casually to Melanie over text. She must be driving you crazy with all the choices. Melanie replied with a cheerful confusion. What photographer? We already booked 1 week ago. Every falsehood my wife told became another crack in the mask she wore. And I recorded them all, screenshot by screenshot, timestamp by timestamp. But something gnawed at me, Jay. Who was he? I replayed the grainy car footage a dozen times, studying his profile. He wasn't anyone I recognized from her office Christmas parties or the neighborhood barbecues. He was a stranger. Until one night. We were invited to a friend's birthday dinner at a downtown restaurant. My wife begged off at the last moment. Melanie's crisis again, she said with a faint smile, but I went anyway. And there he was, across the room, laughing with colleagues, a glass of wine in hand. Jay, I didn't need an introduction. The profile matched, the voice carried over the clink of glasses. He was real, flesh and blood, no longer a shadow caught on camera. A coworker of hers, I realized. He worked in her building. I had seen his face once before in a company holiday photo. The recognition sent a jolt of electricity through me. It wasn't some anonymous stranger. It was someone she saw every day. I sat at the table that night, barely tasting my food, every nerve taut. The birthday candles blurred as thoughts churned. This man wasn't just a fling. He was woven into her daily life. The next morning, I tested her again. I ran into someone last night at the restaurant. I said casually over breakfast. A guy from your office. Tall, dark hair, square jaw. You must know him. She barely looked up from buttering her toast. Oh, probably James. He works in accounting. Nice guy, but kind of dull. James. Jay. My chest tightened as I watched her chew calmly, sip her coffee, and carry on as if she hadn't just spoken the most brazen lie of all. Dull. She was calling him dull while she met him in hotels and kissed him at red lights. It was then I knew she wasn't going to stop. This wasn't a phase or a moment of weakness. This was her new life, running parallel to mine, and she had no intention of ending it. So I doubled down. I began mapping out her nights. Using the tracker data, I created a calendar of her visits to the hotel. Patterns emerged. Tuesdays and Thursdays, mostly. Sometimes Fridays. Always with the excuse of Melanie's wedding emergencies. I also noticed her new habit of keeping a second phone hidden. I had glimpsed it once, tucked into her purse alongside her regular one. Late one night, when she showered, I searched her bag. Nothing. She was careful, keeping it on her at all times. But her mistake came the following week. She fell asleep on the couch after a long, planning session, phone clutched loosely in her hand. I slid it free, heart pounding, and slipped into my study. No passcode. The messages were there. Threads of texts to Jay. Intimate, raw, filled with pet names and longing. Each word was a knife. Can't wait until Thursday. I hated leaving you tonight. I wish we could just stay together and not worry about anyone else. I sat in the dark, the glow of the screen washing over me, my chest hollow. It was worse than I imagined. This wasn't just physical. This was emotional. She was falling for him. I put the phone back before she stirred, but my hands shook for hours afterward. I had enough evidence now to destroy her. But still, I hesitated. Because revenge, I realized, wasn't just about catching her. It was about choosing the right moment to make sure her entire charade collapsed in one crushing blow. The perfect moment was coming. Melanie's wedding was now 2 weeks away. Everyone in the family would be there. Friends, colleagues, neighbors. And my wife was planning to use it as another cover, another excuse to slip away to James. I decided that would be the day. In the meantime, I kept building my arsenal. I transferred every message, every video, every GPS log into a neat folder on a hidden drive. I even printed out transcripts, bound them into a tidy packet. Evidence, clear and undeniable. At night, when she lay beside me dreaming of someone else, I stared at the ceiling rehearsing the reveal. I imagined the faces of her parents, her friends, Melanie herself, when they realized she'd used a family wedding as camouflage for her affair. But with each day that passed, the tension coiled tighter. It began to seep into me physically. My appetite waned, my hands trembled at odd times, my temper snapped too quickly with our daughter. I hated myself for that. She was innocent, caught between two parents, and I swore I would shield her from this as much as possible. One evening, after tucking her in, I lingered by her door, listening to her steady breathing. The thought pierced me. When all this unraveled, what would it do to her? How would she see her mother, her father, her home? The guilt almost made me stop. Almost. But then I remembered the messages, the laughter at the hotel, the second phone clutched in her hand. And my hesitation hardened into resolve again. The night before Melanie's wedding, she packed an overnight bag, claiming she needed to stay with her cousin to help with last-minute details. She kissed me goodbye at the door, smiling sweetly, the picture of devotion. I smiled back, hugged her, and whispered, "You're amazing." She never suspected the venom behind the words. When her car disappeared down the street, I sat alone in the living room, the house unnaturally quiet. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow, the curtain falls. The morning of Melanie's wedding broke bright and clear, the kind of day that seemed made for joy. Sunlight spilled across the lawn, children in pressed outfits darted between parked cars, and guests arrived with laughter on their lips. It should have been a day for celebration. Instead, it felt like the stage of a play, one I had spent weeks rehearsing for. I dressed carefully, dark suit, polished shoes, tie knotted with precision. I looked every bit the supportive husband, father, and brother-in-law. Inside, though, I was a taut wire, straining under the weight of everything I carried. My wife was radiant that morning. She wore a pale blue dress that hugged her figure, hair swept elegantly into a style I hadn't seen her attempt in years. She moved gracefully around the house, helping our daughter into her dress shoes, smiling at me as if we were still the couple people believed us to be. And maybe, in her mind, we were. After all, I hadn't confronted her. I hadn't stormed into the hotel or thrown evidence in her face. To her, the performance was still working. The lie was intact. But today was the final act. We drove to the venue, a sprawling estate just outside the city. White chairs lined the garden, a floral arch framed the altar, and a string quartet played softly as guests found their places. I noticed every detail with unnatural clarity, as if my mind was recording it all to contrast against what was coming. Melanie greeted us warmly, beaming in her gown. "I'm so glad you could make it," she said, hugging my wife tightly. I caught the faintest flicker of guilt cross my wife's eyes, gone as quickly as it came. Melanie had no idea she'd been turned into a prop for months of deceit. We settled into our seats. My daughter squirmed excitedly beside me, whispering questions about the ceremony. My wife leaned in to hush her, her hand brushing mine briefly. To anyone watching, we looked like the perfect family. But my pocket held the truth. Inside my jacket was a neatly bound packet of evidence. Texts, GPS logs, photos, even the grainy video of her and James in the car. I had also prepared a small USB drive loaded with the files, tucked into an envelope. I wasn't sure yet which method I'd use, but the weight of both pressed against me like a second heartbeat. The ceremony began. Guests rose as Melanie walked down the aisle, her fiancé waiting with tears in his eyes. Vows were exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers, applause burst forth as they kissed. For a moment, I almost forgot myself, caught in the beauty of it. But then I glanced at my wife. Her eyes weren't on the couple. They were scanning the crowd, searching, and when they landed on James, standing at the edge of the seating area, dressed sharply in a charcoal suit, her lips curved in the faintest smile. It was subtle, invisible to anyone else. But to me, it was a blade twisting in the gut. After the ceremony, the crowd flowed into the reception hall. Glasses clinked, waiters circulated with trays of champagne, and the band tuned up for the evening. My wife drifted away under the pretense of congratulating Melanie, but I saw the angle she took. Straight toward James. I followed at a distance, weaving through guests, my pulse hammering in my ears. She reached him near the back corner, where the lighting was dimmer. They spoke briefly, leaning in close. His hand brushed hers. For a second, I thought they might kiss, but they pulled back just in time, masked by the noise of the celebration. It was enough. I had what I needed. When dinner was served, I waited until the speeches began. Toasts were made, sweet, fumbling words from Melanie's father, a humorous anecdote from her maid of honor. Laughter rippled through the crowd, glasses raised high. And then I stood. The microphone was nearby, left unattended on the DJ's table. I took it in hand, my fingers slick with sweat, and tapped it lightly. The room hushed, curious eyes turning toward me. I'd like to say a few words. I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. Not about the bride and groom. They've already had their moment, but about honesty. About what it means to truly commit to someone. A ripple of confusion passed through the guests. My wife froze, fork halfway to her mouth, eyes locked on me. For months, I continued. My wife has told me she was helping her cousin with wedding plans. Late nights, endless errands, excuses stacked higher than the cake in the corner. But Melanie, I gestured toward the bride, had no idea. Because it wasn't true. None of it. Gasps broke the air. Heads turned toward my wife. Her face drained of color, lips parting in shock. She wasn't helping her cousin, I said, pulling the packet from my jacket. She was meeting him. I pointed toward James. Every head in the room swiveled. James stiffened, eyes wide, caught in the sudden spotlight. The room erupted into whispers, a cacophony of disbelief. My wife stumbled to her feet, shaking her head, words tumbling out too softly to hear. But I wasn't finished. These are the records, I said, holding the packet aloft. GPS logs of her car at the same hotel, week after week. Audio of their conversations. Messages she sent him from a second phone. And photographs. I laid the packet on the nearest table, where guests immediately reached for it, flipping through the damning pages. Murmurs rose into shocked exclamations. My wife tried to step forward, tears brimming in her eyes. Please, let me explain. But the noise drowned her out. Melanie's mother clutched her pearls. The bride herself stared in horror, realizing her wedding had been used as camouflage. James muttered something under his breath and pushed through the crowd, face flushed. Guests parted, some jeering, some silent. My wife turned to me, desperation in her gaze. Why are you doing this here? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. I leaned close, just enough so only she could hear. Because this is where everyone can finally see you for what you are. She recoiled as if struck. The reception dissolved into pandemonium. Guests whispered. Melanie's father shouted for calm. The band fell silent. My wife fled the hall in tears, heels clattering against the floor. James was already gone. I stood in the wreckage, breathing deeply, my hands trembling from the release of months of restraint. It was done. The curtain had fallen. Or so I thought. Because as the crowd slowly regained composure, Melanie's fiancé approached me, face grim. He leaned in and whispered something that turned my blood to ice. You don't know the half of it. His words, you don't know the half of it, rang in my ears like a church bell. My hands, still trembling from the speech I had just delivered, tightened around the microphone stand until my knuckles turned white. What do you mean? I asked, my voice low. But before he could answer, more guests pressed around us, each demanding explanations. The reception had collapsed into chaos, chairs scraping, whispers hissing, eyes darting between me, my wife's abandoned seat, and the packet of evidence now passing from hand to hand. The groom gave me a pointed look. Meet me outside. 5 minutes. Then he was gone, pulled back into the swirl of relatives trying to salvage his wedding. I stepped out into the cool night air, my heart pounding. The estate's garden was quiet now, strings of fairy lights swaying gently in the breeze. Laughter and music were supposed to fill the space, but only silence remained. He joined me beneath the archway, his face set. "She didn't just lie to you," he said bluntly. "She lied to us too. My best man, James, wasn't just your wife's fling. He was supposed to be helping with our event. Melanie vouched for him. He had access to everything: guest lists, vendors, schedules. A month ago, we caught strange charges on our accounts, but we thought it was clerical errors. Now I know." The realization hit like ice water. James wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was using her. She was the cover. The groom continued. While she thought she was sneaking off for romance, he was sneaking through our finances. Thousands siphoned off, probably more once we checked deeper. His expression hardened. He planned this entire thing, and she let him. I staggered back, dizzy. My wife, my partner of nearly a decade, wasn't just betraying me emotionally. She was an accomplice, whether knowingly or not, in a scam against her own family. That was when headlights flashed across the drive. James's car. He wasn't gone after all. He had circled back, maybe for her, maybe for the evidence packet left inside. Without thinking, I strode toward the vehicle. He saw me and froze, his hand halfway to the door handle. "Don't," I said sharply. He smirked, the same confident tilt of his chin I'd seen at the restaurant weeks earlier. "You don't know what you've walked into." "Oh, I know enough," I snapped. "I know you've been using my wife as your shield while you robbed her cousin blind." For the first time, his mask cracked. His jaw tightened, eyes flicking toward the reception hall. "She told you?" "She told me nothing. I figured it out myself. And now everyone else knows too." He cursed under his breath, then made a move toward the car door. I stepped closer, blocking him. "If you run now, you'll look guilty as hell. Might as well hand yourself to the police and save us all the trouble." For a moment, I thought he might swing at me. His fists clenched, his shoulders squared. But then, from behind me, came the sound of footsteps, guests spilling out of the hall, Melanie's father leading the charge. They'd heard enough to piece the story together. James faltered, glanced around at the forming crowd, then bolted, not into his car, but across the lawn, vanishing into the night. Shouts followed, but no one pursued. He was gone. And then, like a shadow pulled into the light, my wife appeared. Her makeup was streaked, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked at me as if I were a stranger. "Please," she whispered, reaching out. "Let me explain." I recoiled. "Explain what? That you lied every night for months? That you used Melanie's wedding as camouflage? That you handed James the keys to steal from your own family?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. She crumpled to her knees, sobbing. Melanie's father stepped forward, his face like granite. "Get her out of here," he said coldly. "She's not welcome." And just like that, the ties that bound her to this family unraveled. I didn't move to help her. I couldn't. My body felt carved from stone. She eventually stood, shoulders shaking, and staggered toward the parking lot. Her car engine roared to life, then faded into the distance. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Police were called, statements taken. The groom handed over my packet of evidence, which corroborated the financial trail already forming. By dawn, James was officially wanted for fraud and theft. As for my wife, she disappeared. She didn't come home that night, nor the next. When she finally did, 2 days later, she looked diminished, eyes hollow, clothes rumpled. She confessed what I already knew. She had fallen for James, believed his promises, and never once questioned why he wanted her cover story so elaborate. "I thought he loved me," she whispered, tears staining the floor. I stared at her, and for the first time in weeks, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sorrow, just emptiness. "I did love you," I said quietly. "But the woman I loved never existed. She was a mask you wore, and tonight I watched it slip." The divorce papers were filed within the month. Custody negotiations were brutal, but I fought hard for our daughter, determined she wouldn't grow up in the shadow of her mother's deceit. In the end, I won primary custody. My wife moved into a small apartment across town, her reputation in shambles, her family's trust obliterated. James was caught eventually, arrested trying to flee with a suitcase full of cash. His smirk was gone in the mugshot, replaced by the hollow stare of a man whose schemes had collapsed. He faced years behind bars. As for me, I spent months piecing myself back together. Therapy, long walks, Nights sitting with my daughter under the stars as she asked hard questions I tried to answer gently. Slowly, life began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a path forward. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see her standing in that reception hall, the entire room turned against her, the mask ripped away. I remember the look in her eyes, shock, betrayal, fear. Not of losing James, not of losing her family, of losing control. That, I think, was the one thing she never expected. That I, the quiet husband she thought so easy to deceive, would be the one to write the ending to her performance. And as painful as it was, there is a grim satisfaction in knowing the truth. She built her life on a stage of lies, and I was the one who tore down the curtain.